Managing student behavior is a challenge, regardless of the setting, but managing scores of children while driving a 13-ton vehicle presents a challenge not everyone can handle successfully. On top of that, there's a rising concern about school violence and the safety of our students and employees. There is hope and movement to turn around the staggering rise of youth violence. As educators, we refuse to feel hopeless, and it's not in our collective or personal nature to feel hopeless. As we learn more strategies in student discipline, we take yet another step in the process to detect and prevent school violence. On February 11, 1988, while working at a Florida high school as an assistant principal, Dr. Nancy Blackwelder, a fellow administrator and a teacher, fell victim to 2 gun-wielding students, which rocked the educational community. After her recovery, she recognized the need to evaluate school districts' training programs and use the knowledge gained through her experience to help other educators. Dr. Blackwelder is an articulate speaker with experience as a teacher and as an assistant principal at both the elementary and high school levels, an assistant director of transportation, and an administrator in the special needs student education department. Tomorrow, we hope that you'll return to your jobs and use the strategies you learned today and feel that powerful sense of assurance that comes when you know you have the tools in place to ensure that your buses and schools are safe and happy havens for everyone.
I'm Nancy Blackwelder, and as a former teacher and assistant principal at both the elementary and the high school levels, and as a director of transportation in a very large school district of over 100,000 students, 140 some odd schools, over 600 school bus routes, I realized that when I came from the instructional side of the house to the supported services side of the house, that the vast majority of training that we did for school bus drivers was how to drive the truck. And we gave them precious little, if any, information on how to deal with children. Now, it's no surprise to you that dealing with children is half the battle. So I have developed some instructional training for bus drivers because I just don't think it's fair to send somebody out on the street with a bunch of kids without giving them the tools they need to be successful in that environment. It's like handing them the torch of education flame first. So this instructional series that I'm going to produce is all about how drivers get into trouble. We want to get that bus environment to such a state that our drivers have the best chance of staying out of trouble. What we cover in Program 3 is driver-student relations, social networking, and intolerance versus acceptance. Drivers are more and more concerned with their responsibility as a school official to exhibit appropriate driver-student relations. It is important to understand boundaries and the nature of the fiduciary relationship, plus know what's acceptable for appropriate and inappropriate touch and how to avoid favoritism. Let's look at and discuss how drivers and assistants can stay out of trouble when it comes to driver-student interactions. Our first headline, school bus driver in sex case out on $2,000 bond. So what happened here? Well, the driver in her second year as a driver was fired after another student told school personnel about her sexual relationship with a 16-year-old boy who rode her bus. A felony sexual assault charge was lodged against the driver because even though the age of consent is 16 in Georgia, she had supervisory or disciplinary authority over the boy, which makes it against the law. Here's our second headline. Former school bus driver found guilty to endangering the welfare of a child. So what happened here? The bus driver, Newland Sr., introduced his then 23-year-old son to a 16-year-old girl who rode the school bus he drove. That introduction led to a sexual relationship between the student and Newland Jr. Jr. pled guilty to third-degree rape, and Sr. was found guilty of endangering the welfare of a child. Here's our third headline. Onondaga Central School District bus driver accused of sexual relationship with student. Well, Sean Rogers, 24, was charged with criminal sex act with a student. The investigation showed Rogers engaged in sexual activity during school hours in January with a student under the age of 17. So what kind of court cases do we have in educational sexual harassment? Well, Franklin versus Gwinnett County Public Schools, the Supreme Court held that private citizens could collect damage awards when school officials sexually harassed their students. There's something called in loco parentis. The term in loco parentis is Latin for in the place of a parent, and it refers to the legal responsibility of a person or an organization to take on some of the functions and responsibilities of a parent. And it allows institutions such as schools to act in the best interest of the students as they see fit, although not allowing what would be considered violations of the students' civil liberties. There's something that's important in education called the fiduciary relationship. It is defined as a special relationship in which one person accepts the trust and confidence of another to act in the latter's best interest. In such a relationship, the parties do not deal on equal terms. The fiduciary must act with the utmost good faith and solely for the benefit of the dependent party. Amorous relationships that might be appropriate in other circumstances are always wrong when they occur between any school official and any student for whom he or she has a professional responsibility. So how do we deal with the appropriate boundaries? The importance of appropriate boundaries is not restricted to sexual contact per se, even though that has been the focus of most of the attention in this area. Boundaries, therefore, refer to a spectrum of activities that have the potential to exploit the dependency of a student in a number of ways. What can be done to help ensure that appropriate, healthy boundaries will be maintained in student-driver relationships? Well, first we need to be aware of risk factors, those things that may lead to a blurring of appropriate boundaries. And there are a number of factors that reflect a psychological vulnerability of the student, such as a need for an authority figure, a pattern of repeated victimization, or difficulties with a personal relationship. We need to be honest with ourselves about whose needs we are meeting when we decide which students we may involve in a special project or to whom we tend to disclose certain kinds of personal information. So what are the do's and don'ts? Well, do maintain a friendly demeanor towards all students. Don't meet with a student behind closed doors. If you need to have a conference with a kid, wait till everybody else is off the bus and both of y'all step off the bus to have your conference. Be fair and consistent in relations with all your students. Don't make sexually suggestive remarks. And be careful making or telling jokes. Most all jokes make fun of someone or something that can be hurtful or suggestive. Touch policy is based on the premise that positive physical contact with children is absolutely necessary for their healthy growth and development, their nurturance, and their guidance. A no touch under any circumstance policy creates a stark and unacceptable atmosphere for young children. Individuals involved in direct care should provide positive physical contact, appropriate touch, and refrain from inappropriate touch. Children will always have the option to refuse touch except in the case of danger to other children or to the child, him or herself. So what does appropriate touch involve? It involves the recognition of the importance of physical contact to the child's nurturance and guidance. It involves adult respect for the importance of privacy and personal space of children, having the permission of others for touch, responses affecting the safety and well-being of the child, in other words, holding hands when crossing the street, and role modeling of appropriate touch by direct care staff. Examples of appropriate touch are brief hugs as expressions of affection to build self-esteem or when the child needs to be comforted, reassuring touch on the shoulder to show approval or provide support, shaking hands or high fives, and being sensitive to the cultural differences relative to touch. Inappropriate touch may involve any or all of the following: coercion or other forms of exploitation of the child's lack of knowledge, disregard for safety and well-being of the child, failure to respect the child's right to personal privacy and space or to refuse touch from an adult, satisfaction of adult needs at the expense of the child, violating a cultural taboo against sexual contact between adults and children, attempting to change child behavior with adult physical force often applied in anger, and it reinforces with children the concept of striking out to respond to a problem. Some examples of inappropriate touch are forceful holding of a child in a chair or squeezing a child's hand with sufficient force to cause pain as a way to change behavior, forced goodbye kisses, corporal punishment, sexual exploitation, hitting or in any way physically assaulting a child, and prolonged tickling. Favoritism is an issue we got to deal with on the bus. The perception by others in the educational environment that there may be a favorite child can only threaten relationships in the group. It's a natural human response to have favorites because some students are the most popular, are the most outgoing, are the cutest, are the smartest, are the most talented, are the best behaved, are the most attentive, or share the most cultural similarities. Problems arise with having favorites, though. Favorites are perceived as getting an unfair share of the rewards. Those who are not the favorites feel less adequate and less cared for. Favoritism can be perceived as sexual harassment, and favoritism can cause resentment and dissension. So how do we battle favoritism? Be sure discipline is handled fairly and consistently. Be sure rewards and your attention are disseminated fairly and equally. And make an effort to acknowledge all of your students. Many times our society's technological and scientific advances get ahead of the mores and rules for the use of such tools. Such is the concern that has surfaced with the advent of social networking. This unit provides guidelines for bus drivers and assistants to include do's and don'ts of friending and message content that can get school officials into trouble. Here's our first headline: bus driver fired over Facebook posting.
In other news tonight, a former Buford bus driver has filed suit against her old employer after she claimed she was fired for a Facebook posting.
Now, Michelle Threlkeld says the district violated her constitutional right to free speech. Fox 5's Angelique Proctor joins us with her story. Angelique?
Well, the former bus driver and her lawyer contend she made the postings on her own time using her private computer. And they say she took the posting down as soon as her boss indirectly asked her to.
I was devastated, and I'd been there a dedicated employee for 8 years, and it has, greatly affected me.
Former Buford City Schools bus driver Michelle Threlkeld was floored when she lost her job after 8 years. The wife and mother of 2 believes she was targeted after posting an article on her Facebook page that talked about the school district spending $600,000 to install artificial turf on the high school's football and band fields. Threlkeld wrote the words "Today's humor" next to the posting. The next day, she says the superintendent and others called her on the carpet.
He was very upset and angry about my post. Told me that I had humiliated him as well as the administration, and told me that I had put a huge target on my back.
Then, 2 months later, Ms. Threlkeld says on the last day of school she received this termination letter, which simply states, "We no longer have a position for you."
You never received any kind of reprimand or any questioning of your performance as a bus driver?
No, ma'am.
Ms. Threlkeld and her attorney have filed suit in federal court.
The courts have said that public employees have a right to speak on matters of public concern to the community.
Now, we tried repeatedly to reach School Board Superintendent Dr. Jean Hambry about this story, but our calls and emails were not returned.
Tough time to lose a job. Has she found another one in the meantime?
Absolutely not. She says she has lost not only her job, but her benefits. She says her husband is a construction worker. He's having a hard time right now. So she's in a bit of trouble financially.
Across the board. Angelique Proctor, thanks.
Thanks.
Here's another headline. 3 educators fired for flirting on Facebook.
Parent alert for those of you with kids on Facebook. Watch out for their teachers. 3 teachers in New York City have been fired in the past 6 months for allegedly flirting with students on Facebook. One of them even accused of posting a photo of herself kissing a former student on the lips. She's 30, he's 18. The student later told investigators he had sex with the teacher 10 times. Phone records show more than 2,000 calls between them. That's just our first teacher. 2 male teachers are also accused of writing inappropriate messages on students' Facebook pages.
Here's our second headline. Missouri passes a law prohibiting educators from using social networks to communicate with students.
There was a new law that was supposed to take effect in Missouri yesterday, Sunday, August 28th. Many had referred to it as the Facebook law, as it was intended to limit internet interaction between students and teachers in the social media sphere, so MySpace, Facebook, Twitter. But on Friday, a judge blocked the law, calling it a staggering prohibition of free speech rights. On one hand, the people who created the law were hoping to limit and or prevent relationships between students and teachers that might be deemed inappropriate, and they want that interaction to take place in a public sphere as compared to a private sphere. And you also have that by January 1st, all of the school districts were supposed to set up their own policies in terms of deciding what was excessive or inappropriate interaction between students and teachers. On the other side, the teachers who were fighting against this law said that this law could limit regular or routine interactions that they have with their students and some of their students' parents, because sometimes students come to them at a different time with either a request for help or a request about actual homework. You also have teachers who are concerned about a very severe interpretation of the law, which could prevent them from friending their own children who were students at the school, or children who had been friends of theirs or friends of their families for a very long time. Many teachers said they rarely ever, if ever, seek out to be friends with their students on Facebook or any other forum like that, but sometimes the students come to them with questions and they hate the idea of that being limited. And this again goes back to the idea of free speech.
This has become such an issue that we even see the debate on The View.
A school district
districts are struggling to draw up a policy on teachers and students interacting online. So should teachers and students be Facebook friends? I mean, does it cross a barrier? What do you?
I think it does. I think by virtue of it being called a social network, it's like if you go to a club, if you go to a bar, you socialize with your friends. You would not take your kids to, you would not associate with kids at a club or a bar. It's just like what you do in real life. I don't think it's appropriate for your kids to be knowing what's going on in your personal life, and that's what Facebook is.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you on that. Facebook just came up with have you tried the new groups? Is that established?
Yeah,
and they started like groups where you can actually have a set group of people who can log on and off. And I think that there could be potential there for something good to come out of this if, in fact, it's controlled by the schools. And if it's an open forum, transparent communication where it can be used for tutoring and it can be used for extra help, that it's open to the school, parents, and students to all see the conversations
like maybe a school
that are
kind of
going
Facebook
on.
thing.
Do kids want to go on their teachers'
Yes,
Facebook?
they do.
And the teachers want to go on the kids' Facebook to say
some
what?
teachers do.
To
You
say
know,
what?
you
I
share
just went to the
information.
movies. I didn't.
Yeah, it should not be used for that. And I think it's dangerous when it gets into that category.
Here, the school does not allow them to befriend the kids. You know, it's like you should be able to have a personal life. I just don't want my kids to know about it because what I signed on for my kid to know is reading, writing, and spelling. Not that you've been on the stripper pole.
Isn't that also the parents' job to make sure that the child? Because as a teacher, I would want to have my social network page that belongs to me.
That's what I'm saying.
And
you
so,
should be able to.
And so I think that if you're going to do like the teachers' Facebook that for the school, that should be a separate thing. But you should be able to have
an entirely separate thing because even if you have your social life, you wouldn't necessarily take a bunch of 11-year-olds with you.
No, but I don't think any teachers are wanting 11-year-olds to come. But I
think that should be a Facebook page for schools should be completely separate.
To me, teachers should be a non-entity like a psychiatrist. I mean, and your ex-husband. I mean, seriously, it's like we don't need to know their lives. They are teaching you.
Yes.
When I was studying to be a teacher, I learned this phrase: telling. This is how it goes. Telling is not teaching. So if you tell somebody, Columbus was born in whatever year, 1492, or he came over here, that is not enough. That is not teaching. The behavioral change is teaching, is learning. Okay, but what you're saying is,
I
say do not give them information about yourself.
They don't need to know
There should be a
their
blank
personal life.
slate.
So there are guidelines for bus drivers and assistants for using social networking sites. As bus drivers and assistants, we have a professional image to uphold, and how we conduct ourselves online helps determine this image. There have been instances of school officials demonstrating professional misconduct while engaging in inappropriate dialogue about their schools and/or students, or posting pictures and videos of themselves engaged in inappropriate activity. For the protection of your professional reputation, districts generally recommend the following practices. Do not accept students as friends on personal social networking sites. Decline any student-initiated friend requests. Do not initiate friendships with students. Remember that people classified as friends have the ability to download and share your information with others. If you wish to use networking protocols as a part of the educational process, work with your administrators and technology staff to identify and use a restricted, school-endorsed networking platform. Do not use commentary deemed to be defamatory, obscene, or libelous. Exercise caution with regards to exaggeration, colorful language, guesswork, obscenity, copyrighted materials, legal conclusions, and derogatory remarks or characterizations. Weigh whether a particular posting puts your effectiveness as a bus driver at risk. Do not discuss students or coworkers or publicly criticize school policies or personnel. Post only what you want the world to see. Imagine your students, their parents, and your administrator visiting your site. It is not likely posting something to your website or blog and then realizing that the story or photo should be taken down. On a social networking site, basically, once you've posted something, it may be available even after it's removed from the site. And do not post images that include students. Our country has always been a melting pot of different cultures, but even more so today. Drivers need to know tactics for overcoming biases and stereotypes, how to rectify language patterns, and be sensitive to terminology. All our children should be treated with respect. Here's our first headline: School bus driver charged in homophobic attack on a student. The police department alleges that the bus driver, 46, was taunting the boy by calling him gay. When the boy got off the bus, the driver encouraged several other students to go after him and tackle him. The driver is charged with endangering the life of a child and battery. Here's our second headline: Bus driver suspended after heard yelling at Utah school kids using racial slurs against Hispanic and Polynesian students.
I've had enough of you people. You are alienating here. Have on. No good.
A bus breakdown morphed to verbal meltdown.
I didn't do anything. Shut up.
He started yelling at us and telling us that we were a piece of garbages, we were a piece of crap.
Amarili Miranda recorded the exchange on her cell phone.
I got problems with the bus. They will not shut up. Yeah! I didn't do anything. I don't want to hear you run.
Because like in the back, it's nothing but minorities, you know? So he was calling all of us brown trash.
Kids on the bus say some students were acting up when the bus driver lost his cool.
What was your inclination when you first heard about the kids' complaints?
I wanted to go grab the bus driver, grab him, hit him one time, put him on the floor, and I told the director that I'd have all the children on that bus beat the crap out of him.
You don't really mean that.
At that time I did. You know, that hurts a child.
After hearing the students' accounts, the Granite District transferred the bus driver to another route. But then today, district officials heard the recording.
Because of that, the superintendent ordered another investigation into what was said, what was done. As of today, he is not working.
Brian Malahy, 2 News.
Here's another headline: Bus driver teaches a lesson about acceptance, gets sued.
At 7 with the Carmel School District under fire tonight because of the alleged actions of a bus driver. The father of a Carmel Place school student is speaking out to 6 News tonight after he says the school system refused to discipline a school bus driver. Dr. Edward Zimmer says the driver harassed and caused emotional distress to his daughter, and he says he has videotapes that prove it. The father says the driver came to his home after finishing her route in November of 2008 and confronted his daughter. He says the driver even took the girl on her empty school bus without parental consent. 6 News reporter Renee Jamison is on your side tonight with a closer look at the allegations and why the father is speaking out now. Renee?
Well, Todd, Dr. Zimmer says he has tried everything else. He asked the school to take action because of how he says the bus driver treated his daughter and says they did nothing. Mediation didn't work, and now it's set for trial. Words caught on tape about his own daughter, words Dr. Zimmer will never forget.
Because Rachel Zimmer's a stupid little bigot, she says to him.
And your reaction to that?
I sat there with my mouth open.
Dr. Edward Zimmer says the ordeal began in 2008 on this school bus when his daughter told another student she would never vote for President Obama because of her anti-abortion and anti-gay marriage beliefs. That led to an allegation that Rachel told other students they would go to hell, something she vehemently denies. Zimmer says when bus driver Betty Campbell caught wind of it, a camera on board shows her telling students this.
If you can't believe in tolerance toward one another, you don't belong here. You belong in a parochial church school.
Zimmer also says the driver questioned another student about whether Rachel ever said anything racist to him. He told her he didn't know. The camera is still rolling.
Me didn't say anything, Rachel. I want everybody to hear a lie. I mean it. I don't actually know. I don't want you. Well, you're a smart guy. Stupid little bigot.
Zimmer says he was even more stunned and furious at what happened next. He says after dropping Rachel off at her home, Campbell unloaded the rest of the students and then came back to their home. She then took both of his daughters onto the empty school bus without their parents' consent and verbally confronted Rachel about her opinions on gay marriage.
They were a gay couple. And we go to China, and she could be too, and she would adopt a child. She died. God, that child is mine. You can't keep that kid.
With Rachel crying, Campbell goes on to say,
And she's not. I died. She does not inherit my money. That's what this is all about.
Rachel's father says when he questioned the school system about why the driver was not disciplined, he was told she was working within the scope of her employment.
I think a bus driver should use her pedals to get kids back and forth to school, and she should make sure that discipline is held on the bus. And if something gets out of hand, then what that bus driver should do is send them to the school, let the school deal with it, not take it upon herself to discipline any children.
Dr. Zimmer is seeking damages for emotional distress and harassment. The civil trial date is set for December. The school district would not comment because of the pending litigation. The bus driver, who is also named in the lawsuit, had no comment. Renee Jameson, 6 News.
So what would you do? Was it appropriate for the driver to call the little girl a little bigot? Was it appropriate for the driver to say, if you won't be tolerant, you should go to a private school? Was it appropriate that she drop off the rest of the students and return to the girl's home and confront them about their statements? Is the father right that it's not the driver's place to discuss tolerance? Well, it's generally held that the father is wrong, that it's not the driver's place to curtail racial, religious, and sexist talk on the bus. That's our job, to not have children be offended by other children's conversation. The driver had good intentions, but went too far, especially when she started calling names and threatening physical harm. She was right in addressing the girls without an audience. However, she should probably have addressed the problem with the school administration the next day instead of returning to the home and conferencing the girls when their parents weren't home. Here's another headline: school bus driver suspended for Confederate flag.
Good evening, I'm Trish Close. Thanks for joining us tonight. A bus driver in the Phoenix Talent School District suspended from his job, all because of a flag he hangs on his personal vehicle. News 10's Whitney Clark has tonight's top story at 5.
For many people, the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism. But for school bus driver Ken Weber, it's a symbol of something else.
You know, it's about fighting for, state rights. It's a way of life. It's who you are. You know, it has nothing to do with racism.
Weber works in the Phoenix Talent School District. He was suspended Wednesday for refusing to take down the Confederate flag he proudly hangs from his pickup truck. And it's not the only place he's proud to display it.
Well, I'm shocked that I'm getting suspended for, having a redneck flag on my truck. There's no reason that anybody should have to take down something they believe in.
The company he works for, First Student School Bus Transportation Services, released a statement saying this is an internal personnel issue that is currently under investigation. Now, I also reached out to the Phoenix Talent School District, and they say they would rather not comment on the issue at the time. They did, however, say that Weber's flag violates a harassment policy.
What would you do? Do you feel there is a problem with the flag on his truck? Do you feel it becomes a problem when he parks his vehicle on school board property? We should be tolerant of those who have great pride in the Confederacy as a legacy to their ancestors. However, as cultural sensitivities evolve in our society, we need also to be sensitive and tolerant of those who are offended by such displays. Bottom line, drivers are role models for our children, and if we as role models are wearing our beliefs on our sleeves, regardless of who it offends, the message of tolerance is lost. If the driver in this case wants others to be sensitive to his beliefs, then he should return the favor. Plus, if there's a district policy that prohibits such displays, then as a role model, he should follow the rules as he would expect his students to follow his rules. In our society, we try to change the rules if we disagree, not violate the rules. Here's another headline: Minnesota bus driver fired for alleged racist comment. What happened in this instance? A bus driver for the school district was fired after a disputed incident in which two kids accused him of making a racist comment. An executive with the bus company said the driver's conduct wasn't up to the company's standards. Two 11-year-old passengers reported that a student wasn't staying seated and the driver yelled, "Hey, black kid, get your butt up here." The kids say at least a third of the students began chanting racist. The police report and the driver then called the police. Jennings says that the student's recollection wasn't entirely accurate. He says part of it was true, but it wasn't stated that way. Tolerance is respect, acceptance, and appreciation of the rich diversity of our world's cultures, our forms of expression, and ways of being human. If we could shrink the Earth's population to a village of precisely 100 people, with all existing human ratios remaining the same, it would look like this. There'd be 57 Asian, 21 Europeans, 14 from the Western Hemisphere, North, South, and Central America, 8 Africans. There would be 70 would be non-white, 70 would be non-Christian. 35% of the world's wealth would be in the hands of only 6 people. All 6 would be citizens of the United States. 70 would be unable to read. 50 would suffer from malnutrition. 80 would live in substandard housing. 3 would have a college education. So what are some tactics for overcoming stereotypes and biases? Well, become more informed about the history and culture of groups other than your own. Avoid offending out of ignorance. Convey the same level of respect and confidence in the abilities of all your students. Research has shown that an adult's expectations can become self-fulfilling prophecies. Students who sense that more is expected of them tend to outperform students who believe that less is expected of them, regardless of the student's actual abilities. Recognize the complexity of diversity. There are more than one underrepresented groups. Be even-handed in how you acknowledge students' good conduct. Don't try to protect any group of students. Don't refrain from criticizing the performance of individual students on account of their ethnicity or gender. Get a sense of how students feel about the cultural climate on your bus. Let students know that you want to hear from them if you or anyone else is making them uncomfortable. Speak up promptly if a student makes a distasteful remark, even jokingly. Don't let disparaging comments pass unnoticed. Explain why a comment is offensive or insensitive. Let your students know that racist, sexist, and other types of discriminatory remarks are unacceptable. Avoid singling out students as spokespersons. It is unfair to ask X student to speak for his or her entire race, culture, or nationality. To do so not only ignores the wide differences in viewpoints among members of any group, but also reinforces the mistaken notion that every member of a minority group is an ad hoc authority on his or her group. You need to think about rectifying any language patterns that may offend. Do you use terms of equal weight when referring to parallel groups? For example, men and women rather than men and ladies? Use both he and she during discussions and encourage your students to do the same. Recognize that your students may come from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. Refrain from remarks that make assumptions about your students' experiences, such as, now when your parents were in college. Refrain from remarks that make assumptions about the nature of your students' families. Well, I'm going to talk to your mom and dad. Avoid comments about students' social activities that assume that all students are heterosexual. Do your best to be sensitive to terminology. Most Americans of Mexican ancestry prefer Chicano or Latino or Mexican American to Hispanic. Most Asian Americans are offended by the term Oriental, which connotes British imperialism, and many individuals want to be identified not by the continent, but by the nationality of their ancestors, for example, Thai American, Japanese American. In the 60s, Negroes gave way to blacks and Afro-Americans. In the 90s, the term African American gained general acceptance. In California, Pacific Islander and South Asian are currently preferred by students whose forebears are from those regions. Native Alaskans prefer Inuit instead of Eskimo. In Canada, the equivalent to Native American is Aboriginal. Older people and mature customers are more accepted than senior citizens or golden agers.